Some stories, they just stick with you. They start out so normal, a family, a new house, the American dream, right? And then they take a turn into something that just defies all logic. Today, we're opening a case file on one of those stories, the story of the Thompson family. It begins with a quiet suburban home and an old rustic mailbox, but it ends up questioning the very line between being alive and being gone.
So, picture this. You've just moved in. It's your second morning, you're making coffee, and you find this note. A little quirky, maybe, but kinda nice. A welcome from the previous owners. But here's the catch. The Thompsons found out the people who sold them the house had been dead for over 50 years. This wasn't a welcome note. It was the first impossible piece of a puzzle that would change their lives forever.
Okay, so let's establish the facts of the case, just like any investigation. We've got Mark and Sarah Thompson, 2 kids, a perfectly normal family. They buy this charming old house in Ohio, built way back in 1925. And it comes with this one peculiar feature, an old original mailbox that stands by the road. They thought it was a cool, vintage detail. They had no idea it was a direct line to the past.
And this is where we get our first piece of hard evidence. Mark goes out to that old mailbox, and inside is a yellowed envelope. Now get this, no stamp, no postmark. This wasn't delivered by any mail carrier he'd ever seen. Inside, it's not just a welcome, it's a set of instructions. There's something you should know about the basement. At this point, you're thinking, okay, this has to be some elaborate prank, right? But they were curious. They had to look.
So they follow the instructions, they go down to the basement, and sure enough, they find a small, hidden door behind some shelves. A door not on the blueprints, a door the inspector missed. The letter told them where to find the key, and it was right there. Inside that room, nothing, except for a single, small rocking chair. And resting on it, a photograph. On the back it read, Margaret's daughter, died 1932. This was the moment the prank theory started to feel really, really thin.
That secret room was just the beginning, the first crack in their reality. Because the letters didn't stop. They kept coming, day after day. And each one delivered a piece of information that was more impossible than the last. Any idea that this was just a joke was about to be completely blown apart. Pretty soon, it was clear this wasn't just one person writing to them. Different handwriting started showing up, somewhere in a beautiful, old-fashioned script from the original owner, Margaret. Others were more hurried, from her husband. But the most unsettling, some letters were written in crayon, with the simple, shaky handwriting of a child who, according to town records, had died in that very house almost a century earlier.
And then it got personal, deeply personal. A letter arrived for Sarah, and it talked about something she had never told a soul, not her friends, not her family, not even her husband, Mark. It described with perfect accuracy a miscarriage she'd had years ago, a secret grief she carried completely alone. How is that possible? To see your deepest, most private pain written down by a stranger or something stranger is a kind of violation that just changes you. If knowing the past wasn't terrifying enough, the letters suddenly crossed a brand new line. They started predicting the future. A letter warned Mark that his son was going to fall from a tree and break his arm. So, naturally, Mark forbids his son from climbing the trees in their yard. He thinks he's dodged a bullet. But 2 days later, he gets a call from the school. His son fell out of a tree during recess. Broken arm. The letters weren't just sharing history anymore. They were reading from a script of what was to come.
Well, that was it. The curiosity and the fear finally boiled over into pure, raw anger. Mark felt totally helpless, invaded by this thing. He decided he had to fight back. He couldn't fight a ghost, but he could fight the one physical link to it all. That old mailbox.
He went out there with a sledgehammer and just went to town. He smashed that thing to splinters, gathered up the pieces, and burned them. A very final, very physical solution. But the next morning, when he looked out the window, it was back, standing there, completely untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. And of course, there was a letter waiting inside for him.
And the message inside was just chilling. It wasn't just a letter, it was a declaration, a statement of rules. This wasn't something they could just get rid of. It wasn't their property to destroy. The letter made it clear this communication was non-negotiable. They were in it, whether they liked it or not.
And since they couldn't destroy the source turned on them in a new way. The letters got psychological. One arrived that predicted, with cold certainty, that Mark would cheat on Sarah in 2 years. It even offered to name the woman.
It was no longer about revealing history. It was about weaponizing the future, planting a seed of pure poison in their marriage.
And the pressure, the constant intrusion, knowing that your past, present, and future were an open book, it became too much. Sarah had a complete breakdown. She was hospitalized for severe stress and anxiety. And really, who could blame her? Their home wasn't haunted by spirits in the typical sense. It was haunted by an unbearable, inescapable truth.
And right there, in the middle of all that chaos and pain, a new question started to form in Mark's mind. After all the fighting, after all the fear, what if this wasn't an attack at all? What if it was something else entirely? A cry for help, maybe? And that's the big question, isn't it? What exactly do the living owe the dead?
So Mark, totally defeated, changes his entire approach. He realizes he can't fight it. So maybe he could understand it. He stopped trying to figure out how it was happening and started digging into why. And this is where the case file pivots from a terrifying ghost story to a profound historical mystery.
His research into the local archives uncovered something staggering. His house wasn't just a house. It was built on layers and layers of history. First, a settler cemetery from the 1800s, and before that, a Native American burial ground. And that old mailbox, it was planted directly on top of an unmarked grave from 1888. The voices weren't just in the house, they were literally coming from the ground beneath their feet.
And then, as if it sensed his shift in perspective, a different kind of letter arrived. No predictions, no dark secrets. It was just an explanation. It was the letter that finally laid out the motive behind everything they had been through.
And there it was. It was never about hurting them, it was about being heard. Imagine being silent for decades, for centuries, with stories to tell, with love and loss and life still burning inside you. The mailbox wasn't a curse. It was their only lifeline, their only way to break the silence. The Thompsons' fear was just an unintentional consequence of that desperation. And faced with that heartbreaking truth, the Thompsons made an incredible choice. They decided to stop being victims. They decided to stop fighting and running. They chose to listen.
Mark actually wrote a letter back. He placed it in the mailbox, and his message was so simple: we're listening. And that act of acceptance changed everything. The threatening tone vanished. The terrifying predictions stopped. And in their place, the stories. The stories began to pour out.
Looking back years later, Mark had this incredible realization. In all of the thousands of letters they received, the dead had never once told a lie. They told hard truths, painful truths, truths about the future, but never a falsehood. He said it was the living who were the masters of deception. The dead only knew how to tell the truth.
Today, the Thompson family aren't prisoners in their home. They're librarians. They're the custodians of thousands of stories from people long forgotten. They found peace and even a kind of purpose in becoming the keepers of lost histories.
Which leads you to wonder, right? Is the Thompsons' mailbox a total one-off, a complete anomaly, or is it just a very literal version of something that happens all the time? People have reported automatic writing, objects that seem to have a life of their own, messages in dreams. Maybe these are all just different kinds of mailboxes, different ways the past is trying to deliver a message to the present.
And really, that's the question this whole incredible story leaves us with. The dead seem to have a lot to say. They have stories they need to tell. So, if a letter from the other side somehow found its way to you, would you have the courage to open it? Or would you leave it sealed, forever wondering what they wanted to tell you?